So you've had a long day, AP, so perhaps I could do the introduction for you today.
Oh,
Ready?
would you?
Hello. Welcome to A Critical Dragon, where he talks about narrative in film, television, and in books.
Thank you for that, Philip. That's so nice of you. And the the thing is, I'm going to keep that in. You've done the intro, but people have been messaging me saying that I've been mean because clearly I have put up doctored images that are suggesting that you, in some way, are not the evil villain that I say you are. And I was shocked. I was shocked. Like I'd received these images in good faith, and
ah.
what what I then did was I employed a special researcher, and
Aha,
I
special
have
researcher.
asked them.
Okay.
I have asked them to investigate this
Yeah.
issue, and they
Okay.
have supplied me with
Oh
this.
no.
So
Oh no. Oh dear, what is this? How on earth did you manage this?
And you see, this is what happened. Special researcher, and my special researcher, I will name her now, Livia,
Okay.
the potato
Oh,
noob. She has been digging into the archives, selflessly giving of her
oh,
time
just
to,
sacrificing her time.
to
Yeah,
find the
yeah,
evidence of the nefarious Dr. Fantasy.
yeah. I thought that was artistically beyond you. So now that I know Olivia is responsible.
But but now we've had that brief digression. We
Yes,
are gathered here today because we are discussing episode 6 of season 1 of the Wheel of Time adaptation,
precisely.
and we're gonna have a chat about it. And seeing as you are the nefarious Dr. Fantasy, um, why don't you start us off?
Okay, well, I want to say, just broadly speaking, that I enjoyed episode 6, and I thought that there were some things that were done very well. And some of them were slight departures from the source material, which I think is these are decisions that are imposed on the showmakers because of the limitations that they have in terms of, as you said in your video that came out today, which I thought was very well done. They have 8 seasons with 8 episodes each. They have to compress a lot. They have to get across themes and the core of the story in a way that is very different from how the books do it. So there were things that I thought were really well done, and I'm sure we could spend a lot of time talking about. For example, the let's just start with the beginning, I guess, right? That'd be a logical place. The little prologue we got to the show, where we get some background on Swan Sanchi. Is that how you say your name? I think that's how you say it, right?
You're asking me how to
Asking
pronounce
you.
things. The person who regularly mispronounces everything.
Well, you just say it with confidence and with your fantastic accent, and everyone will be convinced. So, but anyway, yeah. So I liked that they gave us this vulnerable girl in the beginning to show us the human here. This is a character who is, yes, she is imposing when she's on the Merlin seat. She is the Merlin seat, and it is the chair that she sits on, and she is very imposing, very powerful figure. The actor pulls that off brilliantly, but I also can't help but remember that vulnerable little girl from the prologue, as I see this person, this entity, this very powerful woman in charge of all of the Aes Sedai. So I liked that they put that in there. The connection with her father, I thought, was beautiful and well done. And as I remember from the books, that is something that comes up a lot, because she uses a lot of the fisher related expressions in the books and stuff. And her father, I believe, comes up, and the fact that he is an important part of who she is something that they established by inserting this prologue, which I don't think ever occurs in the books. So I liked that touch. I thought that was a really wonderful thing to do to humanize this character, to give us to flesh her out in one episode. By the way, she's only been talked about, right, in other episodes. We haven't met her yet, so they humanize her really fast, and they give us a connection to her youth with her father that's very important, informs who she is, the kind of person she is. The fear that, I think that's another thing I like that they get across, is their home was burned out because she was exhibiting the one power, and people were at her part of the world were afraid of this, treating her like a witch, and so forth. So it was almost no choice but for her to go off to the tower. So that was a lot of information, world building type information presented in that storytelling as well. So I liked that very much. I don't know what you thought about the prologue, though.
Well, actually, one of the things that I really liked, speaking of world building, and they've done this a couple of times now, where in the background they've obviously, because these things don't exist, but they've made sure to include stuff in the background. And Swanson, she's from Tyr, and hence the fear of the one power, like almost totally. And in the background, I think you can see the Stone of Tyr, which obviously has massive ramifications for later on in the series.
Yeah.
And it was sort of just painted in the background, much like Dragon Mount. And instead of them going, "Oh look," and pointing at it and drawing attention to it, it creates this immersive experience where there are things to notice, that they have tried to think of the world as a living, breathing world. And again, I think this goes to some of the intentionality that the showrunners have for the show. Now, obviously, with a limited budget and all of the things with like the pandemic, when you're trying to create a TV show and all of this sort of, there are limitations on what you can do. And we've talked about this earlier where, I had criticisms of the White Cloak camp because it didn't strike me as particularly realistic. Yeah. But at the same time, you can see they are trying within the constraints that they have. And to put something like that in the background, because they had to get a visual effects artist to put all of that stuff in, that speaks volumes to me about the intentionality of the showrunners, that they are trying. Whether or not we appreciate it, whether or not we like it, whether or not, those are separate issues for the individual viewer to decide for themselves. But I've seen quite a bit of negativity, for the few times that I'm ever on Twitter, from people complaining about the show and assigning quite negative and pejorative intentionality to the showrunners, which I don't necessarily think is warranted, because what I have seen them do is, yes, they have a particular vision of the show, but everything I've seen is that they're trying to stay true to an interpretation of the story. And why I say an interpretation, every reader has their own individual interpretation, because you and I will read the same book and we will pick up on different things. We will envisage different things. We will weight the information that we glean from the novel differently. That's the whole point of reader response theory, and the fact that the reader is creating meaning in their own mind. So when you see someone else's vision of what they see in the story, some of it will match up with your expectations and your interpretation. Some of it might be radically different. So we are seeing someone else's vision of the Wheel of Time. And as you mentioned, it isn't even their vision of the book, specifically the Eye of the World. It's their vision of the whole story, because they are trying to compress all 14 novels into 64 chapters. And you go, that's a big task for anyone. Things have to be changed. So when you remove something, so let's say like when Rand and Matt in the Eye of the World go to Camlin, and you have that whole sequence of meeting Elaine and that's where they first meet Loyal, and you go, oh, that's not happening. And you go, well, how can they take that out? And you go, well, because is Elaine necessary to introduce at this stage? You go, well, her as a character, she isn't necessary at this stage, and you have a limited budget, you have a limited number of actors, and you're trying to and you're
Yeah.
trying to cycle through an awful lot going on, and that would split audience attention, and you want them to focus on one aspect. So you go, we'll move the introduction of Elaine to later on because she doesn't really become important until later on.
Right.
But if you remove that sequence, then what do you do? Because suddenly now you have, well, that's where they met Loyal, and that's kind of important. And so
Right.
we saw in the show they moved that to when they went to an inn in Tarvalen.
Right.
That's when they met Loyal, and you go, so they took the important aspect of that meeting early on because we needed an Ogier because of the ways and everything that was happening here. That needed to be done. Move that to a different section, and it sort of glosses over that whole. And so you can see they're still trying to stay true to the essence of what is there,
Yeah.
but doing it in a different way because of time constraints and the practical constraints. So
Yeah.
I think you're exactly right. That opening with Swan is so essential to understanding the Amerlin Seat as a person in addition to the role. And
Right.
what we've seen in a lot of this is an attempt to humanize a lot of the characters, because in a novel, you can spend so much time with the characters. You get their internal thoughts. You get to spend time seeing their reaction to everything and to really slow down and investigate it. You don't have that time in a TV show. And even if you did, how are you going to show all of those internal thoughts? So the way that a TV show does it, because it's a different medium, is to give us scenes that show us this stuff to elicit that reaction so that when we see the characters, we carry that memory with us. So seeing that heartrending scene at the start humanizes Swan. So then when we see her as the Amerlin Seat, she comes, let's smack up and down on the ground. And we see this very cold, hard, powerful woman come in.
Yeah.
There's an immediate contrast drawn between what we saw at the very beginning and who she is now. And that implies so much story.
Right. Yeah. And then that's just the thing. I think the fair question to ask is, do the changes, whatever they subtract or whatever they add, do they make compelling storytelling? And for you and for me, when we talked about episode 5 and the focus on Steppen, that's not in the 14 books, but it was an efficient and moving way to establish how important this connection is between an Aes Sedai and her warder. And I thought that was brilliant. I loved it. I thought that was a wonderful way to introduce that, because they don't have the ability, as you do in books, to portray that in a way where we're getting into the characters' minds and we're feeling how they're feeling each other's. They had to find a way to do that. And I thought it was a really interesting way to do it. Another example from episode 6. So something they've added, although it's got its basis in the books, is this idea of Moraine and Swan being lovers. And there is the constant reference to them being pillow friends. These are in Jordan's books, and I think Jordan made it fairly clear what he meant by that. He wrote a blog in which he talked about, getting sweaty under the sheets and that sort of thing. So it was very clear and unambiguous that there was a sexual relationship between the two of them at one time. That doesn't appear to be present in the books, but the showmakers decided to continue the sexual relationship, that they are lovers in the show as they present it. So what does that do to the story? How does that affect the story? That's, I think, an important question. So I think it enhances the story, and here's why. Because they're already doing something behind the scenes, secret. They're keeping it from the rest of the Aes Sedai, right? They are trying to find the Dragon Reborn, because they have a slightly different agenda, a slightly different interpretation of this all-important prophecy, which we're going to talk about, the prophecy, right? They have this plan, which they're keeping from everyone else. So they're already kind of in cahoots. If you add this layer of them being lovers as well, I think you intensify this secrecy that they have, just this thing between them, and it's kept from the rest of the Aes Sedai, that this is dangerous, that they're not supposed to be having this relationship. So this is adds a layer of secrecy, it adds a layer of intensity, and it makes the later scene when Moraine is exiled incredibly poignant, I think, because we know that in their minds, they are saying goodbye to their lovers on top of a friend. So it's a very powerful thing what they've done. And for me, I think what other changes are introduced as a result of this change, I think it's worth it because it intensifies the scene. It makes it more emotional, more impactful. And I think it's a great example of storytelling. So I don't know what you thought about that aspect of it.
One of the things that actually ends up being emphasized because of that change is, if you think the theme of sacrifice, this episode is all about personal sacrifice, because the father sending young Swan off, and he's basically dead now. Now, what he doesn't have a boat, he can't go fishing, he's not going to be able to manage a net anyway because he needed Swan's help with it. All of the that was a sacrifice, and Swan obviously having to go off and leave her father, that was a personal sacrifice. We see when the Amyrlin comes in, and actually, I always forget actors' names. She does this fantastic thing when she comes in and sits down, and her eyes are down, and she pauses, and then looks up, and it's the whole no, you're all waiting on me. I'm going to start when I'm good and ready, and it's such a powerful scene to set it all up. And you have this, she is then this powerful woman with this role, and then you suddenly realize when you have that whole conversation what she is sacrificed to be there, because it's been mentioned before that Moraine was almost her equal in power, that she was a contender for the seat. That's what they said earlier on, and now we see that the two of them were lovers, are lovers. Moraine has been gallivanting on all around the country, as we've been told, and we've been told she's been doing this for 20 years. So for the last 20 years, the woman she loves has, been sitting there, and she's left her behind because of her sense of duty.
Yeah.
The sacrifice that entails. And that suddenly takes on much more strength and resonance and poignancy, because you realize what she sacrificed. She's not just wandering around because she has nothing better to do. She believes in this stuff so much, she's willing to sacrifice the relationship with the woman she loves. And then that adds greater intensity to the fear that they are doing the wrong thing because they cannot be certain. And then we see Swan talking about she's had to sacrifice having an open lover and sacrifice everything in her life to be the leader who is free of any sort of connection or favoritism to anyone else. And then they dress down Nynaeve, and she goes, you don't understand sacrifice. This has to happen. We have all sacrificed. All of this gains meaning because of the personal relationship, because of these scenes, because of understanding them as people, not just the character, not just the role, that they become much more rounded and you can emotionally invest in them.
Yep.
And all of that, I think, adds so much strength and power to the theme of sacrifice. And that's when she is asking other people to sacrifice, you can see that Moraine is uncomfortable with it. She is willing to sacrifice her life. She is willing to sacrifice everything. The Amyrlin is willing to sacrifice everything. But she's not as willing to sacrifice other people. And you see that conflict. It would have been so easy to write her as someone going, yep, kids, all follow me. We're all going to do this. I'm going to lead a bunch of you to your deaths because I believe in this. But that's not her. She genuinely has a belief that she is doing the right thing, but they aren't 100% sure, but they know that sacrifices are necessary.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's beautifully done. And that's good storytelling, in my opinion. And they've done a really wonderful job of presenting that theme and having echoes of it and reinforcing it. And another theme in there that I enjoyed in this episode was friendship, and seeing the younger people from the Two Rivers reunited in this episode was very touching, right?
That's a brilliant scene because we get they've only been apart. Well, to be honest, they've been apart for 1 month.
Yeah.
But when we see them come together, the genuine joy on their faces, it seemed.
Yeah.
Now remember, these are actors. These are actors who've been hanging out. But
Yeah.
they really sold that we've been apart, and oh my God, it's so good to see you.
Yeah.
They sold that so well, and you go, yeah, that was actually a great scene.
Yeah, it was a great scene, and it almost in danger of being too happy there. And what they did was they had Matt, who you're relieved because he's been healed. That was a good scene too, where Maureen sucks the nasty thing out of him and succeeds in putting it
I've
back
some
in the
minor quibbles about that scene, but it's a
okay.
personal quibble. We can talk about that in a minute.
Oh, we shall. But so it was in danger of being a little too happy there at the end with everybody together and tra la la, we're off to have an adventure. But then Matt just like, I don't think I want to go in there. Nope, I'm not going. And everybody's like, Matt, what are you doing? And so Matt refusing to follow while the rest of them are inside, I thought was a nice way to sort of just whoop, nope, we're still in trouble here, to give you that little bit of a cliffhanger hanger at the ending there, I thought. But
And to be honest, I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is when the actor that played Matt left the show.
oh,
And I
interesting.
think that's why that change is there, because a really odd thing about that is when you're watching it, it looked really strange to me. And for the first time ever, I actually went back and rewatched a bit of it. And it looks like they've inserted in a repeat frame of him from earlier on. Look at, because it doesn't look like a natural reaction. It just looks like they've repeated something that was in frame earlier.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. I hadn't heard
and
that.
and I think that's been inserted in the background because that actor left, and I have no
Right.
idea why.
I thought he did the whole first season, but I'm not keeping up on the news here.
But
So
remember, even if he had done the whole first season, sometimes things are filmed out of sequence,
true.
and depending on whether or not they needed people, oh, we're going to do this thing, and they went, oh, we don't have him for that anymore, and that can cause you to change things. So I think that was after the fact, we need to change the last two episodes now.
Wow, because they needed something else to juggle on this, right?
Yeah, and there's a great film called Wag the Dog. In it, one of the characters is played by Dustin Hoffman. He plays a Hollywood producer, and all the way through, every time something goes wrong, he goes, "You don't know what a problem is. You don't know what this is. Nothing. This is easy to fix. I remember filming the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and three of the horsemen died. This is nothing." And constantly, because that's what producers do. Apparently, they just sort out all of these problems. So I think that is a significant departure from what we expect for the Eye of the World. But
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that was planned in advance and how much was we are making the best of the situation that we currently have. And so I want to see the last two episodes
Yeah, now I'm
before I
curious.
judge what
Yeah.
is going on.
Yeah.
Which it brings me to a point. People had mentioned that I think the teaser has been the next episode they're going to reveal who the Dragon Reborn is, and I know a lot of.
Oh, wow, I have to keep up with these things. Huh.
Well, I don't really keep up with these things. It's just every once in a while you just, oh, are they? Oh, that's exciting. But I knew you knew it was going to happen in like episode 7 or 8.
Okay.
Because I know a lot of the anxiety that book readers have had is they keep saying they don't know who the Dragon Reborn is, and it could be that. Yeah. And I thought the scene with the discussion of the prophecies here actually was quite informative. And before we talk about it, I want to mention a theory, a literary theory, and it's Wolfgang Iser's gap theory. And the gap theory talks about the differential in knowledge between a reader and a character. And we can actually add a third poll on this one of someone who has read the whole series, someone who is a viewer of the TV show and a character in the TV show. So if you have read the whole series, you know a whole load of things and therefore are interpreting everything in light of what you know. And you
Yes.
see everything retrospectively, and you see everything as this is what happened.
Mm.
For a TV viewer, they are experiencing it as it is happening, but they have more knowledge than the characters, because when we watch Maureen and we see what Maureen's doing, and then it cuts to, oh, this is what Matt is doing. And we actually, as viewers, have more knowledge about a lot of things going on than the characters do, because we see all of the different points of view. And also, TV shows typically don't show us something unless it's important. Therefore, when we see something, we attribute far more importance to it than, say, a character might, because how is a character going to know that's the important thing that happened today? They don't. It's just one more thing that happens. And so
Right.
characters are perceiving things as they are occurring, but they have no knowledge of their relative importance. And so when we think of the prophecies, as a book reader, we know how the prophecies work out. We know how the prophecies are to be interpreted. We know which aspects are literally true, which aspects are symbolically or metaphorically true and sort of revealed in figurative language. We know that. And therefore, it's easy to say, oh, but this is how you interpret it. Much in the same way, a question is always easy if you already know the answer. But if you don't know the answer, it can be incredibly difficult. So if you think of the prophecies, and this is what they did in the show, and I thought this was very clever.
Right.
They have a belief in them. They are fairly certain that they are right. So much so that Maureen has dedicated 20 years of her life pursuing them. But
Right.
there are all these different prophecies. They don't all agree. They're not 100% sure. And even if you are 98% right, you're convinced, I'm 98% certain, there's a 1 in 50 chance that you're wrong. And if the fate of the world hangs on that, are you willing to go, yeah, but those odds are good enough for me? Or would you have that shred of doubt? And the closer you get to making that decision, how much does that doubt get bigger and bigger and weigh heavier and heavier on you?
Yeah, because if you look at that scene between Moraine and Swan, there's more than a shred of doubt there. There's quite a bit of anxiety in that scene as they're kind of rehashing, but this is the way it's supposed to be, and then well, Nynaeve is too old, and back and forth, and there's it's all uncertainty. They're kind of groping here in the dark. So there's lots of room, I think. So it's interesting though to hear that perhaps we're gonna, if rumors are true, that we might get some confirmation in the next episode about who the dragon is. So interesting. We shall see, and I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about on that matter for sure. But anything else on the prophecies that you wanted to mention?
Well, one of the things I liked was that there are all of these different prophecies. And how do you know which one is true? Because Moraine even mentions there was one prophecy or one story she'd heard about the dragon having many heads. And well, what if that was the true one? And that could explain why she's confused about, well, I have all of these potential dragons. We thought it was just going to be one. The prophecies seem to say it's going to be one.
Yeah.
But how do we know that all of the different foretellers who made these prophecies, that they were all referring to exactly the same person? And then we have, oh, but the soul just gets reborn into one body. Well, how did they know? That is a belief in the world. Now, we as book readers understand it, and we see it, but they are, it's like, even, and I hesitate to make this comparison because I don't want people to think that I am making a direct comparison between a fantasy religion and a modern day religion. But certain modern day religions have a belief in reincarnation, that the soul will be reborn.
Right.
Now, That is a belief. Can you prove it? And people say, oh, well, I've done regression therapy and I've seen all my past lives. And yet we've also seen that a lot of people seem to believe that they all were Cleopatra in a past life.
Uh-huh.
Uh, there are beliefs in the world. This is a foundational belief of the world. And we as book readers know it to be literally true, but it's very hard to prove when you're in the world because you don't have the books as the thing that's telling you. It's part and parcel of your reality. And that's why I think looking at it from the perspective of a character in the world can sometimes be very, very useful to understand potential ambiguity and why characters do dumb things sometimes. So I like that about that scene. But the other thing that I liked about that scene was the room that they meet in
Yeah, the secret room. Yeah.
isn't a real room.
Right.
Because that's a recreation of her childhood home, which we only know because we saw the introduction.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think this is a suggestion that they're both using the Terra Angriel to a dream world. And it's a dream realm that has been created rather than a physical room somewhere.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is it's introducing another aspect of dreaming, because we've seen how one of the Forsaken is infiltrating people's dreams.
Right.
And they're meeting up in the dream world. We're getting more drips and drabs of the world building slowly being built out, but in a different way to how it was done in the books. But it's laying the foundation for the importance of dreams and the dream world now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when Swan talks about how she's been having these dreams, is this a sort of a foretelling, like a prophecy? Is this she's just been having these really anxious dreams? Is this a mystical dream ability? Because that comes up in the books as well. In a different character has that ability. Or is this the Forsaken manipulating events to get them to do something really stupid?
Right.
And we don't know, because all we've seen about dreams so far are the Forsaken using dreams to manipulate people.
Yeah, and I think you'd have to be a book reader even to have deduced that much. So if you're not a book reader and you're only watching the show, I don't think you know the glowy eye person who that is necessarily, right?
Well,
So,
general bad guy, okay?
yeah, 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 right.
So I like that there are so many elements of the world that are being introduced here in basically the introduction of the series, because it's the first 8 episodes. And
Right.
one of the complaints is, like, I was thinking this the other day, Rand still hasn't learned how to use a sword yet. And you go, it's obviously very important. And I realized the important word in that sentence is yet. He hasn't learned to use the sword yet. I'm sure it is coming. And that's what I'm looking forward to, that this season is not an adaptation of The Eye of the World, the book. This is the first of 8 parts of The Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
And I really like how, because if you just chopped out those sections to try and compress down the whole of The Eye of the World basically into 4 episodes, because if you work out how many episodes they have, it's roughly 4 episodes per book.
Yeah.
And you go, how compressed that would be, like the Spark Notes version or the York Notes version of
Oh my God.
the Eye of the World. You would just be skipping through so much. There'd be no time to enjoy anything.
Yeah, they have to compress so much. Yeah.
And obviously when you compress things and you go, well, we don't have time for that anymore, and you take a whole bunch of scenes out,
Right.
there isn't a scene left that is going to bridge the gap that is now created. So that's why we've had episodes where they have created information that bridges those gaps, and I think is laying the foundation for this whole story. And we see those elements of world building you were talking about with the warders, that we've seen in this, about the politics of the White Tower. And
Very nicely done.
we joked about how academia can be a pit of vipers.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah,
That
watch out. Yeah. Especially when the stakes are low. But yeah, no, it's really well done. I like it a lot. I even am sort of coming around a little bit on the aesthetics of the show. I know that we have problems with the realism of them not having mud on them and stuff like that. And I think that they're going for a certain aesthetic vibe here with a lot of pure colors and a lot of, I think that's what they're doing. And when they had the funeral at the beginning of episode 5, and we were, those are shallow graves. I mean, if you look at it from a practical standpoint, nah, that doesn't work. But if you look at it from an aesthetic point of view, and you look at the bright colors everywhere, and they're trying to make statements here, I think. And I'm interested, one of my viewers commented on how we might see these bright colors change as things happen later in the series, as evil takes over, and you might see more muted tones, and you might see more grime and that sort of thing. So I'm interested to see if that happens. But I think they're, even though it didn't work for us, clearly, because we complained about it, we can recognize it was a deliberate choice, a kind of presentation that they were going for. So I can appreciate that within
right.
the confines that they have.
No, I will say about the costuming. When the Aes Sedai were in their camp and their tents were color coordinated and they were wearing the whole,
Yeah.
that I objected to. See, when they're in the tower and
Yeah.
they're all in there, that I don't object to, because that's the formal setting, and I know in the books they're just meant to be wearing their shawl. It's the shawls that are color coded that way, and they can wear whatever. I actually like that, those blocks of color, and it looked fantastic.
Yeah, it looked good.
The costuming in this really is some of the outfits. I'm not exactly sartorially elegant in any way, but I could really appreciate the costuming that they've gone in to give people very distinct costumes, even using that very overt, over the top color scheme. But I can appreciate it when they were sitting in session. That I thought was brilliant. And then when we have Moraine, those overhead shots when she's on the ground, or the shot of her standing alone looking out across the whole valley, on the top of the tower, all of those shots, like those colors, you go, that's why that color palette, that aesthetic that you're talking about, works so well. It's not muted, it's not gray, it's not grainy and boring or trying to be gritty. It's celebrating, it's leaning into its epic fantasy nature without it being hyper saturated, Disneyfied, cartoonish. It's celebrating all of the colors, and I like that. It's carving its own vision of this world. And one of the points that you made there about there's a tension between realism and the aesthetic.
Yeah.
And this brings me on to my quibbles.
Okay.
There's always going, and I admit, personal quibbles. There is always a tension between the realism of the diegesis, the cohesion, the narrative cohesion of the diegesis, the story world, and the logic of a story world, and the needs of a show to create drama and dramatic tension.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this in the opening sequence not the opening, when Moraine is being questioned by Swan.
Right.
And she said, like, can you tell me or won't tell me? I cannot tell you. And we know that the Aes Sedai cannot lie. And she has said outright, with no ambiguity, I cannot tell you. Therefore, everyone in that room knows that she literally physically cannot say what she was doing, which with the barest fraction of deduction, you would go, she has sworn an oath on the oath rod. That's the only reason why she cannot, that it's connected to some sort of oath. And therefore, when an Aes Sedai says, I cannot tell you, and there's no wiggle room, no ambiguity, you don't follow up with cannot or will not. There is no wiggle room here. She said cannot.
Right.
But that would be the logic of the story world, to try and be like absolute, literal about the story world.
Right.
The dramatic tension, though,
Exactly.
is sold by that confrontation. And I will accept, to a greater or lesser extent, every time this sort of comes up, that wiggle room. That sometimes I don't mind when rules get a bit bent or even broken
Yeah.
for the sake of a better, more powerful emotional scene.
Right.
So that was my quibble with that first scene.
Yeah.
But in her banishment scene, and this was something one of my commenters, Benjamin, had pointed out. When she is swearing the oath, Swan asks her to swear to the Amarylline seat. And
I
she
know.
says,
She
I
changes it.
swear to Swan Sanjay.
Swan
And
Sanjay.
then
Yeah.
all of the pet names and and you go, just because the shot is framing only your face does not mean that everyone else in the background has disappeared and cannot hear you.
Right.
Just because we're close up of you and then close up of Swan and you're both crying and looking at each other lovingly, knowing that you're parting, does not mean that no one else can see this.
Yeah.
But
But
it was a powerful emotional moment. And so whether or not that breaking of the narrative logic for
right.
the sake of the dramatic moment
Mm-hmm.
works for you or breaks immersion for you,
Right.
that again, it comes down to, I think, very much an individual viewer response and whether or not you want the world to be rigid in its application, or if you're willing to go with it in terms of the emotional truth and the dramatic truth of
Right.
it.
Yeah, it seems to me consistent with other choices that they've made that they would go with the emotional impact rather than if she had just said, even if she tweaked it to say instead of a Merlin seat, if she said Swan Sanchi, other people might not have caught, the distinction, and then she'd be safe. I assume that's going to have import later on down the line. That's safe to say. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Now, the fact that she kept going with all these pet names and nicknames and stuff, you could, I suppose. I mean, they're giving up the game in a way. It seems like the other Aes Sedai are there, and aren't they going to catch on that there's some kind of connection here that they haven't realized before? But you could excuse it by saying, well, everyone knows that they were close friends at one time. And that everyone knows, it's common knowledge that Swan Sanchi has all of these, the fisher folk things in her background, and so it might have been a way of just, an affectionate goodbye, I suppose. So yeah, there are ways to explain it, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Oh, like you're bending narrative logic there to try and support that one.
I'm trying my best. Yeah.
But the thing that I actually liked, like really liked about that scene, and it was the more subtle thing that they did, was Swan slowly extending her finger ever so slightly to touch Maria, and you go, that is the thing that I went, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, right, you're just going to tell oh, okay.
Too much. Yeah.
But
I understand the choice. Yeah.
It's a balance between what is too obvious, because
Yeah.
and people will pick up on subtle things in this show that I don't pick up on.
Yeah.
And sometimes I need to be hit over the head with the information.
Oh, I thought, okay, never mind. With information, of course, yeah.
Do you want me to put the picture of you teaching back up? So like, I can understand that, and I can understand why for some people that breaks the immersion. But I think it worked well, and it ties into something. It was going to be very difficult to do, and I've come round now to how the show has decided to resolve this. The Aes Sedai, obviously in the books, have very blank faces in that they are ageless. They don't give anything away. They are the consummate poker players. But in this, we've seen they are much more emotive. They are much more emotional. And let's face it, like they cry, they get angry. You can read their emotions, and you go, well, that's actually kind of important for a visual medium.
Yeah,
For something like a TV show, it is actually important. Otherwise, you would have an awful lot of actors walking around looking very wooden the entire time, and
right.
everyone would complain about why is everyone so wooden.
Exactly.
Um, and so seeing the more emotive, that was something I think it took me a while to get used to about why the Aes Sedai were so expressive. But
Right.
I've come round to it, and I actually think that's going to work out, and it's fine.
Yeah.
I don't know, but they have made a lot of the characters a lot more emotional and easier to read their emotions.
The visual
Um,
medium, I think, dictates that they have to do that, and that's not. Book readers know that they're supposed to be a certain way, but the people who are new to this story, watching the show and having not read the books, it wouldn't work. I think if you had, like you said, a bunch of very stoic faces all the time, the people new to it would say, how come nobody in the show can act, so I think that they had to do that probably, just because they're having all these things to juggle, and one of the big things is, how do we please both the readers, the fans of the books, and the people who are new to this, who maybe we want to go read the books because we love this story too, and we want to tell it in the best possible way, so that we can in this medium with these restrictions, right?
so
So
there's an interesting, and it's one of the subtle things that they have done. Um, we keep hearing, and in this episode, it's brought up specifically about Perrin getting his back healed, and Marine says, "Oh, the Sisters of the Yellow Aja, the best healers ever."
right.
You're not even going to notice that he was ever injured.
Yeah.
And what we've seen a lot so far is like Moraine has healed Rand's dad, forgotten his name.
Yes, that's right. Oh,
How can
well, anyway,
uh,
grandson.
Tam?
Yes, Tam.
Yeah,
That's right, Tam.
and Moraine has healed Matt, and Moraine keeps healing people, and you go, well, and then Karenni healed Moraine,
Right.
and you go, well, so a green Aja can do it, a blue Aja do it. What's the big deal about the yellow Aja? And one of the things that's been really interesting is every time, like when Karenni healed Moraine, there was a big scar left. When
Uh-huh.
Moraine healed other people, there are scars left. She hasn't healed them fully. They're not. Whereas when she talks about how the yellow Aja are going to do it to Perrin, it's
Mm-hmm.
you will never even know that he was injured, and that it is such a subtle, tiny thing, but it
Mm-hmm.
suddenly explains it. Yeah, Marie's powerful. Marine can do these things, because it's very difficult to say, oh, well, she doesn't, she has some healing magic, but not. How do you show that? And you do
Right.
it by saying, yeah, she keeps leaving scars because she's crap at it. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I thought that was such a clever little thing. But I'll tell
That's
you
right.
the right. We were talking about the dagger healing, the dagger scene, and why I
Yeah.
have a
What was your
personal.
problem with that scene? Yeah.
So, and okay, book knowledge time. Obviously, it took a lot of people, a lot of the Aes Sedai to do this, linked together because it was
In
so
the
cool
books.
in the
Yes, in
books.
the books. Yeah.
But I was willing to go with it that for the sake of, because what you're going to introduce 7 more Aes Sedai or and bring them
And
all
she's
in,
trying to keep their presence secret as well.
um,
So,
which is a very
yeah.
clever thing I want to talk about in a minute. But
Yeah.
when she draws it out of him, I've seen the film Venom, and I've seen Venom 2.
Uh-huh.
Clearly, the CGI people have seen both those films as well. And it's one of, I can't fault them for it, but at
Yeah.
the same time, I couldn't unsee that. And all I had in my head was suddenly, oh, is she going to become Spider-Man? And there's going to be, where's Eddie Brock? And it popped in there. I couldn't get rid of it, particularly when it was
On her
crawling
mouth.
over her mouth. And I'm going,
Yeah.
oh, God. But personal quibble, because it was visually stunning, and it did look good, and it looked really cool, and then the knife floating and then dropping down, and the scene worked,
Right.
apart from the CGI looking really like Venom.
Yeah. Yeah. If you hadn't seen Venom, you would have been really impressed, probably. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will also go on the record myself because I was the bellyachre about the music early on. I will go on the record as saying I enjoyed the music in this episode, in episode 6, the most by far of all the music we've heard. And it's not that prominent because you don't have like performances, musical performances put in front of you necessarily, but just the background music, particularly when Moraine was riding her horse to the gate near the end of the show, there was some music that I found really effective. I thought it was nice. So that even is working a little better for me at this point. So yeah.
And again, like with so many of these things, it takes a while to settle into the aesthetic that a show is actually creating. Because think about it, we're only 6 episodes in. This is not, in the grand scheme of things, we're still at the beginning. You know, a lot of people are going, why haven't they not done that? And yet. Why has this not happened? Yet. Like we're still so early on in the story of the Wheel of Time. These are the early chapters, and it takes a while to acclimatize to how the story is going to unfold, how the showrunners see this vision. And like even something like Game of Thrones, it took a while for it to build up the audience that it did, for people to buy into that version of the books. And those books are written very much with the televisual style in mind. Like a lot of those chapters are structured in terms of almost visualizing it on the page. That's not how Jordan wrote. Very different approach to the structure and the style.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I loved about Moraine, it's so telling about her character. She kept everyone apart and didn't let on that all of the Emmons Fielders were there, that the Two Rivers folk. She kept them apart because she kept in control. She was trying to manage the situation. And also by doing that, it's not putting all your eggs in one basket, which we see when Leandra rocks up and goes, oh, Matt Cawthon, is it? And his friend Rand that are staying. That's why she's been doing this, because there are spies everywhere. The White Tower is a hotbed of political infighting and one-upmanship and all these different competing agendas. And suddenly we now understand this game that Moraine is playing. It's not just about, we're going to defeat the Dark One. It's not just about, oh, Swan and I have this plan. It's, I have white cloaks I need to dodge. I have dark friends I need to dodge. We have this plan that we need to do. I need to manage these idiot backwoods teenagers who won't listen to what I'm saying. Plus all this politicking. You know, there's she is spinning so many different plates in the air at the same time.
Yep, and at risk to herself, because she and Swan mentioned that if their sisters were to learn about what they're up to, they would be stilled. Which is the same thing that happens to the men when they're gentled. I guess it's like being spayed or neutered, you know, it's kind of the same thing. But stilled, which is, you know, you don't want to be stilled, you know, or gentled.
I know it is actually quite true to character. I honestly, I'm now getting really fed up with Nynaeve. And the reason that I suppose, what's the expression? This is a hot take.
Okay.
She is strong. She is independent. She stands up for herself and for the people she wants to protect. It keeps coming across in this that she's just rude. You're meeting the Amyrlin Seat. You're a private audience with one of the most powerful people in the world. And she's like, what? What up? Why? Why did I? And you go, stop being, you are meant to be a grown-up. You don't have to be deferential, but a modicum of being polite to someone wouldn't bloody kill you.
Although, in her defense, it is almost as if they've been kidnapped, and there's a lot of fear behind that, and it's Nynaeve, and I don't know, it's working for me. I like her. I like that. Yeah.
And again, this is how, you know, personal interpretation of a scene. Like you can understand her rationale and you go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm looking at it going, who taught you manners? That is so rude. But I loved in that whole sequence when Swan is saying, "Oh, the strongest channeler in a generation." And you could see Egwene going,
Oh,
Nynaeve, and
not even,
she
right, right.
looks across. It's like, what? I thought
Yeah,
they were talking about me. And it
yeah,
was such a wonderful, tiny little moment. And you go, it again, small attention to those little details. Just they sell the world of the show. Is it the exact world of the books? No, but they're creating this world that I think in a lot of ways you can buy into. Like the ways being opened by the one power now. And obviously
yeah.
that's not how it is in the books.
Right.
But is it only the one power that can open them? Or later on is Loyal going to go, oh, by the way, you don't actually need the one power. There is another way to do it.
I was concerned about that because they're diminishing the role of Loyal there in a sense. And also, why did he have to be there if Moraine could open it herself? So maybe we'll find out answers to that
No,
later.
but
But
well, in the point in the books is Loyal's the only one who can navigate it.
right, right. So we'll find
Because
that out in the next episode. Yeah.
yeah, so but I can understand for someone who hasn't read the books. Oh, look, there's a magical portal. How do you open it? Magic. What's the magic called? The one power. Right. So you need someone with the one power to open the magical portal. Yeah.
Right.
You can, that's a narrative logic that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Except if you've read the books and you go, oh, but that's not how it is in the books. But
Right.
again, Loyal may come up later on and go, Marin, you didn't need to do that. There is another way to open them. You just
Yeah.
didn't know.
It was another dramatic moment, with her weaving and all of that. So, but okay, we'll give him a pass for that, I guess. So,
But in all honesty, I am once again like I really enjoyed this episode. I think the Warder episode and this episode more so than any of the others. I am more and more buying into this version of the Wheel of Time. I'm becoming more and more invested, even against my better judgment. They are
same here.
dragging me, kicking and screaming into liking it.
Same here. Well, it was a pleasure to talk with you about this, and I do feel like I've gained some appreciation even more for episode 6, and I'm surprised as well to find myself really anticipating this the next show now with eagerness, and I've been more and more pleased since episode 4. That's where it started for me. So yeah, I just hope it continues, and I wish them all the success.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, Philip. And for those of you still watching, thank you for watching. Thank you for your continued support. And we will see you in the next one.